flaming discs, cigar-shaped metal object, glowing orange spheres in the sky. People see all sorts of strange things. And no, I'm not talking about crazy folks or con artists. To make it even spicier, journalists love to add fuel to the fire. The military is hiding everything from us. Some even say mysterious men in black are out there, erasing every trace of their existence. But why are we so fascinated by this? Why do people get hooked on stories of alien abductions and flying saucers? And what about those who believe visitors came to Earth long ago, leaving behind the pyramids or the statues of Easter Island as proof? It seems we've always wanted to believe in help from the skies. Hello, my friends. Today's lecture is all about the secret files on UFOs. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss our upcoming videos. The very first witness of flying saucers. June 24th, 1947, a 32-year-old pilot named Kenneth Arnold was flying a small plane near Mount Rainier in Washington state. Rainier, a massive mountain surrounded by legends and myths since ancient times. Local native tribes always worshiped the mountain, but Kenneth just kept flying. Now, Arnold was what we call a credible witness, a reasonable man, an experienced pilot, a businessman, a married father of two. In other words, not some crazy, uneducated, or drunk stranger. And then, he saw a bright flash just to his left, north of Rainier. What followed, as he later described, was a chain of 9 strange flying objects moving from north to south. They moved in formation, and every few seconds, something happened. They flashed in the sunlight, like bursts of activity in the sky. And once again, remember this, Arnold was a credible witness. He was a careful observer. He even measured the time to check their speed. He did some quick math in his head and realized they were moving almost twice as fast as the speed of sound. All of this was strange, confusing, unbelievable. When he reached his destination, flying from Washington state to Oregon, he landed and told other pilots. They started discussing what it could have been. 2 explanations came up right away, and later, in similar situations, many people would say the same things. The first idea, maybe it was some kind of US military project, a secret test, an unknown device, something hidden from the public. The second, maybe it was a Soviet spy craft. The word satellite didn't exist yet, but people thought the Soviets must have launched something. These 2 versions kept repeating. In America, in the Soviet Union, always the same. Maybe it's our weapon. Maybe it's their spies. These ideas never disappeared. They still come up even today. Arnold thought about it. If it was a weapon, if it was spies, he had to report it. He went to the FBI office, but nobody was there. So he went to the local newspaper and told them about the strange discs he had seen. And here, for the very first time, came the phrase we all know so well today. He said, "They flew like saucers skipping across water." In English, the word was saucers, more like small plates. But of course, we got used to saying flying saucers. The newspaper printed the story, and very soon, the news spread across the United States. A sensation. Something unknown was flying in the skies. And don't forget, this was 1947. The Cold War was just beginning. Everyone was tense. Everyone was suspicious. So people believed easily maybe the US was testing a new weapon, or maybe the Soviets were sending spies and secret devices. But the US Air Force immediately said, "We don't have any such weapon." And yet, as always, denials only created more suspicion. Oh, you deny it so strongly? That means it must be true. At first, it was just a short-lived sensation. A small news story, reprinted everywhere, commented on by the military, and then almost forgotten. But then came a man named Raymond Palmer, a man with a very difficult fate. As a child, he suffered an accident, and he stopped growing. He became a hunchbacked, deformed dwarf. Of course, childhood was hard. School was hard. Kids laughed at him. And like many lonely, unhappy children, he escaped into his own world. He read constantly, especially small magazines full of mysterious stories. You can picture it, a little, deformed, unhappy boy, reading about strange powers, the mysteries of history, the mysteries of space, and something was brewing in his mind. Time passed, he grew older, and he began to write for the same magazines. By the late 1930s, he was publishing a magazine called Amazing Stories. He wrote his own tales, published the works of others, always about mysteries and adventures. He loved mystical stories, where strange forces interfered with human life. And one day, he noticed something. Whenever the words Atlantis or Lemuria appeared in a story, sales would skyrocket. Everyone wanted to read about lost civilizations. So, Palmer began publishing more stories, more articles, and circulation grew higher and higher. Among the many letters arriving at the magazine, one caught his attention. It was from a man named Richard Shaver. Shaver was a welder, and clearly unstable. He claimed that from the sounds of his welding machine, he could hear messages about what was happening underground. Palmer took these strange, half-mad writings, edited them a little, and did what he often did before. He presented them as if they were real events, not fiction. One of those texts, titled I Remember Lemuria, was published. In it, Shaver remembered that thousands and thousands of years ago, two great civilizations, Atlantis and Lemuria, had come to Earth from space. They fought each other, drained their strength, and eventually left Earth, flying away to other planets. Nature changed. The sun's radiation became deadly. So the Atlanteans and Lemurians built enormous underground cities, filling them with primitive humans forced to serve them. And finally, these civilizations left Earth, but underground dwellers remained. And according to Shaver, they sent him messages through the sound of his welding machine. A wonderful story. Very scientific, of course. But by 1948, Palmer was publishing a different magazine called Fate. He read about the flying saucers, and he loved the story. He started reprinting those reports. But here, something important happened. He combined the idea of strange, mysterious, most likely military discs with his wild tales about aliens. And he was the first to write that these flying saucers were connected to space, that they came from an extraterrestrial civilization. And since circulation went up again, he pushed the idea even harder. And we have to admit, people liked it. In 1948, in New York, the very first convention of specialists in flying saucers was held. Today we'd call them ufologists. The word UFO, unidentified flying object, was just appearing. Back then, they simply said, flying saucer experts. About 30 people came to that meeting, and they discussed the possibilities. Was it the US Army? Was it the Soviet Union? Or was it something from outer space? Now, it's important to point out, these people were not the first to talk or write about life beyond Earth. Ideas like this go back to ancient times. In the 17th century, people wrote about it. Jules Verne wrote about it. Many others did too. But usually, in those stories, Earthlings traveled somewhere else. Like in Verne's From the Earth to the Moon, humans went outward. But now, the feeling was different. It wasn't us going to them. It was them coming to us. Strange beings or strange machines visiting Earth. Maybe flying ships. Maybe something else. And yes, even before 1947 and 1948, none such thoughts already existed. A very important starting point came in 1877. The birth of the theory about traces of civilization on Mars by the Italian astronomer Giovanni Schiaparelli. Here's how the famous astrophysicist Carl Sagan described it. Sagan, of course, was a different kind of scientist. He never lowered himself to talk about flying saucers. But in one of his lectures, he said this. Imagine it's the year 1877. The Earth, moving around the sun, comes close to Mars, as happens about once every 17 years. Giovanni Schiaparelli observes Mars and sees strange, thin lines across its surface. Schiaparelli called these lines canali, meaning furrows in Italian. But in translation, they became canals, and the idea spread. Canals on Mars. That must mean civilization. Of course, later scientists explained no telescope could possibly see such canals. But the idea had already been born. The American astronomer Percival Lowell, a wealthy Bostonian, picked it up. To study the canals, he built a large observatory in Arizona with his own money. Naturally, it became known as the Lowell Observatory. As telescopes improved, photographs showed no canals. But Lowell argued, yes, the camera may not see them, but the human eye, trained properly, does. This is a classic example. When people desperately want to believe in something, they twist any argument to fit their hopes. According to Lowell, the canals proved the existence of an ancient Martian civilization, more advanced than Earth. A civilization forced to fight against a planetary drought of unimaginable scale. He believed they built a network of canals to carry water from the melting polar caps to thirsty equatorial cities. Even more, Lowell said the global network of canals meant there must be a world government on Mars. He even claimed to locate the Martian capital, a place he called the Lake of the Sun. Today, these theories about Martian canals only make us smile. We know much more about Mars now, and we know there are no canals. The image of a Martian civilization inspired an entire generation of scientists eager to study Mars. But it wasn't just Lowell's theories that mattered, because Lowell influenced someone far more famous, someone everyone has read, Herbert George Wells. And in 1897, Herbert George Wells published his famous book, The War of the Worlds. In the story, Earthlings notice strange flashes on Mars. Something is coming. It turns out Mars is cooling, and the Martians can no longer survive there. So they build a giant cannon and fire rockets toward Earth. There's an impact, an explosion, and inside the crater, a strange cylinder. From it slowly emerges something horrifying. Wells describes it like this. A big gray round mass, the size of a bear, crawled slowly out of the cylinder. It glistened in the light like a wet leather strap. Two large, dark eyes stared at me. The creature had a round head and what could only be called a face. Beneath the eyes was a mouth. The lips moved and trembled, dripping with saliva. The monster breathed heavily, its whole body pulsating. One thin tentacle clutched the edge of the cylinder, the other swung in the air. Herbert George Wells made them as repulsive as possible. Alien, disgusting, monstrous. Not only that, they drained human blood and injected it into themselves to survive. They had no gender, they reproduced by budding, they communicated most likely through telepathy. Everything about them was completely unlike humans. And soon, they began to conquer Earth, capturing people for their blood. Chaos, terror, the world falling apart. Wells describes it all in vivid detail. And although Herbert George Wells loved science, and many of his ideas influenced scientists, the War of the Worlds was not really about aliens. It was about the future of humanity. What if humans, like Martians, eventually lost all organs and only pure intellect remained? This was his favorite theme. Life as we know it ending, replaced by something cold and alien. In the book, the Martians seemed unstoppable. The army tried to fight back. Nothing worked. For 21 days, the terror continued. And then suddenly, it ended. The Martians died. The hero, ready to be killed, ready to have his blood drained, instead saw corpses lying everywhere, birds pecking at their remains. The Martians were gone. Why? They had fallen victim to Earth's diseases. Here is the irony Wells created. Creatures so alien, so inhuman, yet killed by our microbes. Later, modern scientists and biologists often pointed out the contradiction. If Wells' Martians could be infected by human diseases, then they must share our DNA. They must have the same biological structure. A sharp observation, and a flaw in the story by Herbert George Wells. And it must be said, under the influence of the War of the Worlds, and perhaps simply under the influence of new scientific ideas, strange sightings began to appear. At the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries, in many different countries, people reported unusual phenomena in the sky. Discs flying overhead, beams of light, glowing fireballs, and many other unexplained events. Not all of these were connected to space. Often people just asked, "What is that?" and moved on. The mythology of flying saucers had not yet been created. But already, some began to speculate. In the 1920s, one journalist suggested a bold idea. Maybe Earth itself belongs to higher beings, a civilization far superior to our own. We simply don't know it, but from time to time they send their messengers, arriving on strange flying objects just to check on us. Why would such beings want Earth? That was never clear, but the suggestion was one of the first attempts to link these sightings to something cosmic. Throughout the early 20th century, the 1910s, the 1920s, the 1930s, people kept reporting strange things in the skies. Of course, many of these events had natural explanations, meteorological effects, atmospheric lights, or even experimental aircraft. But not everyone accepted that. During World War II, Allied pilots flying over Europe reported mysterious lights and objects. They called them Foo Fighters, glowing spheres that suddenly appeared next to their planes. Most pilots thought at once, it must be some kind of secret weapon. And later, in 1947, Kenneth Arnold would have the same thought. Maybe this is advanced technology built by the US Air Force. Still, all these were isolated stories, strange, surprising, but scattered. It was only after the war, in the late 1940s and early 1950s, that the number of UFO reports truly exploded, especially after Kenneth Arnold's story was published, and when Raymond began promoting it heavily. As we know, the moment something strange gets attention in the press, dozens of others suddenly report the same. Sometimes it's people seeking attention. Sometimes it's self-suggestion. Sometimes it's simply a misinterpretation of something ordinary. But in the late 1940s, countless stories appeared of disks, glowing spheres, and all sorts of mysterious objects. And we must remember, this was a time of enormous global tension, a time of suspicion, rivalry, and fear of new weapons. In such an atmosphere, it was all too easy to believe that something mysterious was flying in our skies. People were deeply afraid of the beginning of World War III. It was the dawn of the atomic age. Atomic bombs had already been dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. A few years later, more tests followed, and both America and other world powers began preparing massive new weapons called hydrogen bombs. People were terrified, so every time something strange appeared in the sky, it was immediately linked to secret weapons, ours or theirs. The more anxiety in society, the more anxious stories appeared. That was the 1940s. And in America, reports of flying saucers multiplied. Every mysterious light, every unusual object, sparked speculation. Some said, it's the Air Force testing new technology. Others whispered, it must be our enemies. And of course, there were always those who shouted, aliens! The US military took the report seriously. After all, what if it really was a spy craft? The Air Force even created a special project to collect and analyze every piece of information about such sightings. Serious scientists were brought in, and yet, not a single case ever provided solid proof of extraterrestrial origin. Many sightings remained unexplained, but mostly because of a lack of data. In truth, they could be reflections of sunlight, the bright planet Venus, atmospheric effects, or meteorological balloons launched by scientists or the army, but not flying saucers. Still, the military gathered large amounts of data. And here, psychology kicked in. The project was classified. And the moment people heard classified, suspicion grew. Reporters noticed something curious. Whenever they came to interview witnesses, representatives of the Air Force were already there. And that made people think, if they take it this seriously, then something must be going on. What are they hiding? And so the public's fascination only grew stronger. A new figure appeared, a man named Ken Purdy. He was actually an automotive journalist, writing mostly about cars. But flying saucers fascinated him, and he became one of the first, though not the very first, and certainly not the last, to develop a conspiracy theory. His idea was simple. If officials say nothing, then they must be hiding something. If they deny it, then they are trying to deceive us. Even more, Purdy suggested the opposite could be true. Maybe the military wants us to know something. From this came a theory that grew more popular over time. Inside the military, some were skeptics. Why skeptics? Because Purdy said they are not allowed to see the real materials, just like ordinary citizens. Others hesitate, and still others are true believers. And the believers, they know the truth. This line of thinking would later grow into countless stories about secret Air Force bases, wreckage of saucers, even hidden alien bodies. But Purdy's version was different. He claimed the believers inside the system wanted the public to know, but since they were forbidden to speak openly, they deliberately leaked information. The classic shape of a conspiracy, impossible to disprove, because all the proof is supposedly hidden. When the Air Force published a report dismissing the sightings, Ken Purdy responded with a sharp comment. The report contradicts itself. It feels as if someone wants to warn us, but is afraid to reveal too much. And of course, that kind of statement only fueled suspicion. Later, a journalist who studied UFOs wrote, "Officials quickly discovered that no amount of logic could ever persuade a witness who believes he saw something terrifying, maybe even extraterrestrial." And that is exactly right. Logic can offer 1,000 explanations, but then comes the cry, "I saw little green men with my own eyes." Carl Sagan often cited the American thinker Thomas Paine, who once asked a brilliant question. What is more likely, that the laws of nature were broken, or that a person lied? But even that argument convinces only some. In 1950, an American pilot named Arnold published a piece in a magazine called Truth. The article had a striking title, "The Flying Saucers Are Real." Even today, this work is sold online. Collectors pay high prices for it. And many still read it and think, yes, this must be true. Whose main idea was this: Earth has been under alien observation for 175 years. Strange sightings have happened here and there, but in the past 2 years reports had sharply increased. Why? He gave his answer. Aliens are afraid of atomic explosions on Earth. They fear that hydrogen bombs, the massive weapons being tested, could knock Earth off its orbit, sending it crashing into other worlds, even destroying other civilization. This idea spread widely, that aliens feared nuclear weapons and wanted to warn us. It was a powerful thought. People were afraid of nuclear war. They didn't know what to do. And the idea that some higher power wanted to stop us from destroying ourselves, it resonated deeply. Donald Kehoe also believed aliens wanted peaceful contact, that they wished to warn us, and that contact would be friendly, that they could understand us, because they were somehow like us. Where he got this idea was never clear, but he believed it, and so did millions of others, convinced that alien contact was coming soon. Even earlier, people dreamed of such contact. Nikola Tesla, for example, hardly a superstitious man, but a brilliant scientist, worked on ways to send signals to Mars. In 1924, when Mars came close to Earth, radio stations held minutes of silence, hoping to catch signals from Martians. And now, with the shadow of nuclear destruction looming, people longed even more for someone, anyone, to stop us. In 1952, Washington, D.C. was shaken by a wave of sightings. Strange lights in the sky. Strange objects reported again and again. The event became known as the invasion of Washington. Some wondered, were aliens trying to seize America's capital? The U.S. military investigated. Reports reached the highest level. Even President Harry Truman was briefed. That's how seriously people took it. Soon, the Central Intelligence Agency also launched its own commission to study UFO sightings. And of course, secrecy surrounded it all. And where there is secrecy, there are rumors. If it's classified, people thought, then surely something is being hidden. And so, the public's obsession only grew stronger. In the 1950s, a legend appeared. Mysterious men in black who would arrive at the scene of UFO sightings or supposed alien landings and erase all traces. This, of course, later inspired comic books, and eventually the famous movie Men in Black. The roots of the story came from the fears of the 1950s, and naturally, culture began to exploit those fears. In 1951, the film The Day the Earth Stood Still was released. One of the first films where an alien arrives not to conquer, but to warn humanity. He is misunderstood, hunted, even shot at. In the end, we learn that his people had surrendered their freedom to intelligent robots. And those robots had one task. If anyone attempted to start a devastating war, the robots would stop it immediately. The alien came with one of these machines and delivered a warning. He told humanity, "You have two choices. Either follow our example, give up wars, and submit to the authority of rational machines, or destroy life on Earth." It was a message that felt painfully relevant. And it is very telling that in this film, the alien, Klaatu, is handsome, calm, sympathetic. He takes the form of a human, but of course, an ideal human. There is even a hint of romance between him and the female lead. This was the opposite of Wall's monsters. Here, the alien came to save us. And from then on, both traditions flourished in culture. In books, in films, in television. Sometimes the alien was terrifying, grotesque invaders. Sometimes the alien was charming, even lovable, like Steven Spielberg's E.T. Two lions, side by side, fearsome strangers or kind visitors. But in every version, someone from the skies kept coming to us. At the same time in America, the UFO craze only grew stronger. And in 1950, a book of far greater literary quality appeared. Ray Bradbury's The Martian Chronicles. Like The War of the Worlds before it, Bradbury's book wasn't really about Mars. It was about Earth. The message was clear. The planet could destroy itself. The story begins in the distant future of 1999 and ends in 2026. Across those years, humans rushed toward Mars, driven by the growing threat of nuclear war on Earth. At first, they encounter Martian civilization. But soon the Martians perish, infected by chickenpox carried by humans. A direct echo of history, like when Europeans brought disease to the Americas. And perhaps also inspired by Wells' Martians dying from earthly microbes. Humans settled deeper and deeper onto Mars. Meanwhile, on Earth, nuclear war breaks out. Cities fall. The planet lies in ruins. One of the most haunting chapters is There Will Come Soft Rains, a story of an abandoned automated house. Beautiful machines still working, still performing their routines, but no people left alive. And finally, in 2026, a handful of survivors flee Earth and begin a new life on Mars. It was a warning. Bradbury used the imagery of Martian life, fragile, fading alien, as a mirror, a way to warn humanity of its own path. This deep desire to hear a voice of reason, not from scientists on Earth, but from higher beings with special powers, led to something new in the 1950s. No longer just, "I saw a saucer" stories. Now there were countless reports of contact, encounters with aliens, conversations, abductions, strange warnings, and always the same message: don't fight wars, don't build bombs, or Earth will be destroyed. One of the most famous names was George Adamski. He had emigrated to America as a child, grew up there, and over the years tried everything: philosophy lectures, mystical group, even running a burger stand in California. But Adamski became fascinated with UFOs. He claimed to have photographed flying saucers, but soon photos weren't enough. So he upgraded his act. He said he walked into the desert one day and saw a silver cigar-shaped craft land. From it emerged a small scout ship, and then a being. A man with long blonde hair, dressed like a pilot. According to Adamski, the alien spoke in gestures, in English, and of course, telepathically. The message was simple. He came from Venus. He was deeply worried about Earth. He drew the shape of a mushroom cloud with his hands and said, "Boom, boom." Atomic explosions would destroy the planet unless humans stopped. Adamski asked him, "Have you ever taken people aboard your ships?" The alien smiled, nodded, and flew away, but not before promising to come back. Adamski even said the alien took a roll of his camera film, and days later, the ship returned it, through the airlock straight back to him, with extra scratches on the film, just to make it look authentic. There were footprints left in the sand. Adamski photographed them. Obviously fake. But people loved it, and soon hundreds of others claimed to have contact too. Some were taken aboard saucers where the captain was a woman, apparently elderly, but of unbelievable beauty. She came, they said, from a hidden planet in our solar system, always hiding behind the sun, conveniently out of sight. Others spoke of telepathic conversations. Some claimed spiritual teleportation. Adamski himself told wilder and wilder stories, meeting Venusians in Los Angeles cafes, flying over the desert, even being taken to the far side of the moon. And what did he see there? Forests, hills, cities, breathable air, and happy moon people. Back then no one had seen the far side of the moon. So why not? Thousands believed him. Clubs of UFO believers appeared everywhere. One American sociologist studied such a group closely. He found many members were older women, poor, lonely, sometimes uneducated, already part of spiritualist groups. It was easy to laugh and say, "Gullible old ladies." But the truth is different. Belief in saucers cut across every group. Rich, poor, educated, uneducated. People everywhere wanted to believe. And two feelings clashed constantly. On one hand, aliens as saviors, noble space brothers coming to rescue us. On the other, aliens as monsters, a terrifying danger from the skies. Both ideas spread like wildfire in the 1950s. By the end of the decade, the wave of saucers slowed a little. But by then, humanity was stepping into a new reality. The real space age had begun. It all caused an explosion of excitement. You'd think it would be the opposite. Now scientists actually knew how to fly into space. Real rockets. Real spaceships. No more random saucers zipping around. To launch into orbit, you need insane preparation, a whole army of engineers, years of work. But no, people weren't disappointed. They were more hopeful than ever. In the 1960s, the focus shifted. Not, they will come to us, but we will go to them. Maybe not today, but soon, very soon. It was a global feeling. The space race was on. Sputnik had launched. Yuri Gagarin had flown. And suddenly people believed our footprints would soon mark the dusty trails of distant planets. In 1962, astrophysicist Carl Sagan helped popularize the search for extraterrestrial life with books and lectures that reached wide audiences. No little green men, no cigar-shaped spaceships, but real science, the possibility of communication, the odds of finding intelligent life. Even if the conclusion was, chances are low. Still, the idea made a huge impact. People were ready to dream, to believe, to wait for proof. The terrifying monsters of Wells faded into the background. The dream of contact moved to the center stage, and science fiction poured fuel onto the fire. The very phrase, science fiction, mattered. It wasn't just fantasy. It was fantasy dressed up in science. Readers devoured Isaac Asimov, Robert Sheckley, Ray Bradbury, Arthur C. Clarke, Doyle. Parsers, warp drives, teleportation, whole libraries filled with visions of the future. It all felt real. It all felt just around the corner. And of course, cinema joined in. In 1968, Stanley Kubrick released 2001, A Space Odyssey. Kubrick worked with Arthur C. Clarke on the script, based on Clarke's story, The Sentinel. The result was breathtaking. On one hand, it was about technology out of control. A computer, HAL 9000, smarter than humans, manipulative, and willing to kill. The astronauts traveling toward Jupiter trusted HAL at first. Then the machine read their lips, understood they were planning to disconnect it, and turned against them. Cold logic versus human fragility. For me, that was the heart of the film. Kubrick himself said he made a movie about the relationship between humanity and the universe. Clarke said he wanted awe, reverence, even fear, and they achieved it. Slow, strange, confusing, but unforgettable, and underneath it all, once again, contact with extraterrestrials. From the very beginning of the film, when a black monolith appeared to prehistoric humans and sparked their evolution, to the monolith on the moon, to the one orbiting Jupiter, and finally, the lone surviving astronaut transformed into something else, a new being, a star child. The message was clear. Contact would not destroy us. It would elevate us. Aliens as saviors. The universe as a helping hand. Once again, salvation would come from above. From the skies. From space. In the 1960s and 70s, a new obsession took hold. The idea that aliens hadn't just arrived recently, they had been here all along. The theory was simple. They had visited Earth in ancient times, left behind signs, warnings, monuments. In other words, the birth of the ancient astronauts craze. And let's be honest, whoever goes looking for proof will always find something. Atlantis? Sure. Lemuria? Why not? A hidden Pacific continent? Sounds exotic. If you want lost civilizations badly enough, you'll dig them up everywhere. The champion of this line of thought was a Swiss hotel manager named Erich von Däniken. Not a scientist, not even close. But hey, at least his mind wasn't spoiled by education. And yes, he also happened to serve time in prison for fraud and embezzlement. But according to him, it was all for the greater good. Because how else could he fund his groundbreaking research into aliens, building the pyramids? His book Chariots of the Gods became a sensation, later rebranded as Memories of the Future. It was even turned into a movie in the early 70s. And suddenly, theaters that normally showed dusty documentaries were packed with crowds. Tickets sold out. Lines at the box office. Everyone desperate to hear a forbidden truth that schools and newspapers didn't tell. Von Däniken delivered it all with great confidence. Everyone knows the ancient Egyptians couldn't possibly have built the pyramids. Except, archaeologists do know exactly how they were built. We even have graffiti left by the workers themselves. But no matter. Everyone knows the giant stones of Baalbek are impossible to move. Except, lots of muscle and simple engineering can move them. Still, the way he said it sounded so scientific. He dropped numbers, measurements, cosmic coincidences. Like this gem, the Great Pyramid is 147 meters tall. Multiply by 1 billion, and you get the exact distance to the sun. First problem, the pyramid's top is broken. Second, why a billion? Pick another number, you'll get a cosmic result too. Third, Earth's distance to the sun changes all year anyway. But hey, who cares about math when you've got mystery? Easter Island statues, clearly astronauts in helmets. The Mayan sarcophagus at Palenque, obviously a man in a rocket ship, not a symbolic world tree. Von Däniken's method was always the same. Start with everyone knows, then twist a coincidence into a revelation. And people ate it up. Why? Because it was presented with authority, with a straight face, as if it were undeniable science. Carl Sagan later wrote that von Däniken's real trick was insulting our ancestors, assuming they were too stupid to build anything big, too weak to work together, too primitive to calculate, when in reality, they were just as smart as we are, sometimes smarter, because survival demanded it. But von Däniken's message was emotionally irresistible. Don't worry, humanity didn't do this alone. Aliens helped us. It was comforting. It was exciting. And above all, it sold. Meanwhile, real scientists, like astronomer J. Allen Hynek, took a very different approach. In the late 1940s, he had been hired by the U.S. Air Force to analyze UFO reports. At first, he debunked case after case. But over time, even he admitted, some reports remained unexplained. Not proof of aliens, but something worth studying. And by the 1970s, he was testifying at the United Nations, saying, "We do not know what these unidentified objects are. Let's at least investigate." Of course, the public heard only the first part. Not explained? Then it must be aliens. And so, the ancient astronaut craze and the UFO craze danced together. One fed the other, while Hollywood and paperback publishers laughed all the way to the bank. In 1959, two astronomers, Giuseppe Cocconi and Philip Morrison, published a paper that electrified the scientific community. Their idea was simple, but bold. If we can beam radio waves across space, maybe someone out there is beaming signals back. And if we listen carefully, we might catch a message. Thus began the modern search for extraterrestrial intelligence, SETI. For a while, even NASA flirted with the idea, trying to fold such projects under its wing. And despite all the pulp horror stories about bug-eyed monsters, most scientists were quietly optimistic. They believed that if contact ever happened, it would be friendly. In the early 1970s, the Pioneer 10 probe was launched. It carried a gold anodized plaque engraved with symbols, a map of our solar system, a sketch of a man and a woman, even a diagram of the probe itself. The hope was poetic. Someday, millions of years from now, some advanced civilization might stumble upon Pioneer 10 and say, "Ah, so this is what Earthlings were like." Carl Sagan loved this vision. He called it humanity's first whisper into the galaxy. Realistically, of course, the probe will take hundreds of thousands of years to even approach another star. But still, the dream mattered. In 1974, Frank Drake and Carl Sagan sent an even bolder hello, the famous Arecibo message. From a giant radio telescope in Puerto Rico, they beamed a 169-second signal toward a star cluster 25,000 light-years away. It contained binary numbers, the atomic numbers of basic elements, a sketch of human DNA, a little stick figure of a human, a map of the solar system, and info about the telescope itself. Basically a cosmic about us page. Of course, by the time it gets there, Earth will have changed a little. The telescope is already obsolete, and who knows if our DNA will still be around by then. But hey, details. In 1977, something strange did happen. At Ohio State University's radio observatory, a 72-second burst lit up the receivers. Astronomer Jerry Amon circled it in red on the printout and scribbled one word: "Wow!" And ever since, it's been called the WOW signal. Proof of aliens? Probably not. It never repeated. Most likely interference. But it was just enough to keep the dream alive. That's the problem with SETI. Hope is free, but monitoring the sky 24/7 costs money. And as years passed with no signal, funding dried up. Projects shut down. Until the 1990s, when a new idea appeared. If NASA couldn't afford supercomputers, maybe ordinary people could help. Volunteers downloaded a program that turned their home PCs into mini analyzers of radio data. While you made coffee, your computer was busy searching for aliens. It was the world's first cosmic crowdsourcing project. Tens of thousands joined. And yet, still nothing. Later, astronomers turned to exoplanets. If alien civilizations exist, maybe we could spot their cities glowing in the dark. So far, silence. Then came bigger hopes. Massive telescopes in the Chilean desert, like ALMA, the Atacama Large Millimeter Array, a network of giant dishes scanning the heavens. If anything is out there, surely this will find it. But as of now, the sky remains quiet. Or, as some like to joke, maybe the galaxy just has us on mute. Surveys are never the absolute truth, of course, but still, it's pretty fascinating to see what people really believe. For example, according to Pew Research, about 2/3 of Americans, roughly 65%, believe aliens exist. And every second person thinks that military UFO reports could actually be proof of extraterrestrial life. Around 40% are skeptical, but hey, that still leaves a lot of believers out there. Now let's talk about the shape of the Earth. Most Americans, about 84%, are sure the Earth is round. But somewhere between 4 and 10% still believe it's flat. Yes, in 2025. And if we look wider, international polls say about 54% of Americans, 56% of Germans, and 52% of Brits believe in life beyond Earth. Basically, in every other household there's someone who says, we're not alone in the universe. And here's the fun part, most people don't imagine aliens as monsters from horror films. It's usually the opposite. They think contact might be peaceful, or at least that governments know something and are hiding it. Remember Liu Cixin's novel, The Three-Body Problem. The heroine, after surviving the Cultural Revolution, sends a message into space. Come and save us. And as we find out later, those saviors weren't exactly what humanity needed. But the impulse itself, we're suffering, please help us. That's deeply human. Still, the truth is, nobody's coming to fix our mess. We'll have to solve our problems ourselves. So, what do you think? Are we alone in the universe or not? And if not, How do you imagine aliens? Friendly visitors or hostile invaders? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd really love to read them. And don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss the next lecture.